There is something about last night that refuses to disappear. A conversation happened behind closed doors. A question was asked that should never have been asked. Someone wanted answers about you, but they did not expect the answers to turn the entire situation upside down. They thought they were going to discover your darkest secret. They thought a psychic could look into your life, uncover something hidden, and give them the advantage they desperately wanted. But according to this fictional spiritual story, the moment the question was asked, everything changed. Because the person seeking information about you was not prepared for what came through. They were expecting something embarrassing. They were expecting something damaging. They were expecting a weakness they could use against you. Instead, they were confronted with a truth about themselves, and that truth began with one simple question: what is this person hiding from me? The room became strangely quiet. The person who had arranged the reading had already convinced themselves that you had been keeping something enormous from them. They had replayed conversations, remembered small details, examined pauses in your messages, and wondered why you sometimes seemed to know more than you said. They had become convinced that there was a hidden chapter in your life, something you had never explained, something they believed would change the way they saw you. So they hired someone they believed could reveal what you would not. They wanted your darkest secret. They were not prepared for the answer. The psychic looked at the person sitting across from her and reportedly said something that immediately changed the atmosphere. "You are asking the wrong question." That sentence landed harder than expected. The person frowned. They wanted information about you. They wanted certainty. They wanted a secret, but the psychic refused to follow the story they had already created in their mind. Instead, she asked why they were so determined to uncover something about you. And that question opened a door nobody expected, because beneath their curiosity was fear. Beneath the fear was guilt, and beneath the guilt was a truth they had been avoiding for much longer than one night. They were not simply trying to discover your secret, they were trying to find out whether you already knew theirs. That is where the story becomes complicated, because there had been something this person had never told you. Something they had repeatedly promised themselves they would explain one day. Something connected to their personal life, their past, their choices, and a relationship status they had avoided discussing honestly. The secret was not merely that they had complicated feelings. The secret was not merely that they had been thinking about you. The secret was much bigger. They were married, and yet, somehow, that was not even the biggest revelation of the night. Before you continue, remember that this is a fictional, spiritual-style story designed for reflection and entertainment. It is not a factual psychic reading, and it cannot establish what another real person is secretly thinking or doing. Now imagine the scene. The person sitting across from the psychic has become uncomfortable. They had expected the conversation to be about you. Instead, every question seems to circle back toward them. The psychic asks, "Are you being completely honest about your own situation?" Silence. That silence says more than any answer could. The person looks away. They had not expected that. They had expected someone to confirm their suspicions. They wanted reassurance that you were hiding something. They wanted someone to tell them that their doubts were justified. Instead, they were being forced to confront their own unfinished business. The psychic tells them that searching for another person's darkness will never give them peace when they are carrying something they refuse to acknowledge themselves. That sentence stays with them, because they know exactly what she means. There is a marriage, there is a history, there are responsibilities, there are promises, there is a life that looks one way from the outside and feels completely different on the inside. And there is you. That is the part they have struggled to understand. They never expected their feelings toward you to become so complicated. They never expected a simple connection to make them question decisions they once believed were permanent. They never expected to reach a point where silence became harder than honesty. But before they can explain anything, the psychic says something even more surprising. The secret you are searching for is not the secret that matters. The person becomes still. What does that mean? The psychic looks at them. It means you came here looking for something hidden in someone else's life, but the truth is waiting inside your own. And suddenly the entire conversation changes direction, because this person remembers every time they avoided telling you the truth, every time they changed the subject, every time they said, "It's complicated." Every time they promised they would explain later, every time they convinced themselves that keeping quiet was somehow protecting everyone, they realized that silence did not make the situation simpler, it only made the eventual truth heavier, and now the question becomes unavoidable. Why were they so afraid to tell you? The answer is not simple. There may have been fear of rejection, fear of judgment, fear of consequences, fear of losing control, fear that once the truth was spoken aloud, there would be no way to return to the version of the story they had been telling themselves. But there is another layer. They were afraid you would see them differently, not because you knew nothing, but because you saw something in them they had tried to hide from themselves. You saw the uncertainty, you saw the hesitation, you saw the person behind the carefully constructed image, and that frightened them. Because being understood can be more intimidating than being admired, they could handle someone liking the version of them they presented, they could handle attention, they could handle admiration. What they could not easily handle was someone seeing the contradictions. Someone noticing that the confident person was actually uncertain. Someone realizing that the person who claimed to have everything figured out was quietly questioning everything. That was the part they could not control. And that is why the psychic's words hit so deeply. You are afraid this person knows more about you than you have told them. The person does not answer. They do not need to. Their silence becomes the answer. The psychic continues. You are not afraid of their secret. You are afraid of what happens when they learn yours. The room feels smaller. The person finally admits that there is something they have never said, something about their marriage, something about why it happened, something about how complicated their current circumstances have become. They explain that being married does not automatically mean every emotional question in their life has been resolved, but they also understand that marriage is serious, it carries commitments, it carries responsibilities, and it cannot simply be ignored because feelings become complicated. That distinction matters. Feelings can be real without automatically making every decision right. confusion can be genuine. Without excusing dishonesty, a person can care deeply and still have a responsibility to communicate honestly. That is the lesson hidden inside the story. The psychic does not tell them to chase you. She does not tell them that destiny gives them permission to disregard another person's feelings. Instead, she asks them to stop hiding, because the truth cannot heal what deception keeps reopening. And then comes the revelation that changes everything. The psychic says, the biggest secret is not that you are married. The person looks confused. What is it, then? She answers, you already know what you need to do. You have simply been afraid to admit it. Those words echo through the room, because sometimes the most powerful secret is not information, it is a decision. A person may spend months looking for signs, advice, opinions, predictions, and reassurance because they do not want to make a choice themselves. They may ask everyone except themselves. They may search for answers everywhere except within their own conscience. They may hope that someone else will tell them what to do so they do not have to accept responsibility for the decision. But eventually, the questions stop, and the truth remains. They know they must become honest. They know they cannot continue allowing you to exist inside a story built on incomplete information. They know that if you are important to them, you deserve clarity rather than confusion, and they know that their marriage cannot be treated as a minor detail. This is why the revelation feels bigger than the marriage itself, because the marriage is a fact. The real secret is the fear surrounding it, the avoidance, the emotional conflict, the inability to speak, the realization that continuing to hide will eventually cause more damage than telling the truth. And somewhere in all of this, they remember you. They remember your conversations. They remember moments when you seemed distant. They remember times when you asked simple questions and they gave complicated answers. They remember how often they said they were tired when the real problem was that they were overwhelmed. They remember how many times they wanted to tell you something but stopped, and suddenly, those memories feel different. Maybe you were never imagining the tension. Maybe the strange pauses were not meaningless. Maybe the uncertainty you noticed came from the fact that this person was struggling internally. But again, this story is fictional and should not be treated as evidence about a real person's private life. What matters is the emotional lesson. You deserve honesty. You deserve communication. You deserve relationships where important truths are not hidden until they become impossible to ignore. And that is why the next part of the story becomes even more intense. After the psychic session ends, the person does not immediately leave. They sit quietly. The questions have changed. They are no longer asking, "What is this person hiding?" They are asking, "What have I been hiding?" That question follows them outside. It follows them into the night. It follows them when they return home. It follows them when they try to sleep. And eventually, they reach for their phone. Your name is there. They stare at it. They think about sending a message. Then they stop. They type, delete, type again, delete again. They want to begin with an apology. But an apology without honesty would be meaningless. They want to explain everything. But they are afraid the explanation will sound like an excuse. They want to say they never intended to hurt you, but intentions cannot erase consequences, so they put the phone down. Then pick it up again. This time, they begin with 4 words, "I need to tell you." They stare at the screen. Those words feel heavier than expected, because once the sentence is finished, the secret will no longer belong only to them, it will become part of reality. They will have to face your response. You might be angry, you might be disappointed, you might need distance, you might ask questions they are not prepared to answer, you might decide that their choices have changed how you see them. And they know they cannot control any of that. That realization is painful, but it is also necessary. Honesty is not a guarantee that someone will stay. Honesty is a willingness to respect someone enough to let them make an informed choice. That is the deeper message hidden inside this fictional revelation. They may have thought the biggest risk was telling you, but the greater risk was allowing you to make decisions without knowing the truth. The night continues. The person sits alone with the consequences of their choices, and for the first time, they understand something they had resisted. You are not responsible for solving their confusion. You are not responsible for rescuing them from the consequences of their decisions. You are not responsible for waiting indefinitely. You are not required to accept a situation simply because someone claims their feelings are complicated. That realization changes the emotional balance of the story. Because suddenly, the focus is not on whether this person will choose you, the focus is on whether they will finally choose honesty, and those are 2 very different things. They may care, they may regret, they may feel confused, they may even wish things had been different, but real maturity begins when a person stops using feelings as an excuse for avoiding responsibility. That is what the psychic's revelation forces them to confront. The next morning, the person wakes up. Remembering the conversation, for a moment, they wonder if it was all just a strange dream. Then they remember the question, the secret, the marriage, the warning, and most importantly, they remember the sentence. The biggest secret is not that you are married. They sit quietly. What could be bigger than that? The answer slowly becomes clear. The biggest secret is that they have been living 2 emotional realities at once. One reality is the life they built, the other is the life they keep imagining, and the gap between those realities has become impossible to ignore. They have been trying to exist in the middle, but eventually, the middle becomes its own form of dishonesty. They realize that they cannot keep asking the universe, fate, psychics, friends, or circumstances to make the decision for them. They must take responsibility. That is when they finally begin writing the message. This time, they do not make it dramatic. They do not blame circumstances. They do not claim that everything was destined. They simply tell the truth. They explain that they are married. They explain that they should have told you earlier. They admit that fear caused them to delay. They acknowledge that keeping the information from you was unfair. They do not demand forgiveness. They do not pressure you to respond. They simply give you the truth. And then comes the hardest part. They send it. The message leaves their phone. There is no way to pull it back, no way to rewrite it, no way to pretend the conversation never happened. They wait, minutes pass, then more minutes. They check their phone, nothing. They place it down, pick it up again, still nothing, and somewhere in that silence, they finally understand something. Your response belongs to you, not them. You have the right to process. You have the right to question. You have the right to walk away. You have the right to decide what kind of relationship aligns with your values. And that may be the most important transformation in the entire story. The person who originally hired the psychic, because they wanted control, now realizes that control was never theirs. They cannot control what you know. They cannot control how you feel. They cannot control whether you forgive. They cannot control whether you remain. All they can control is whether they tell the truth, and that is enough. Later, they remember why they had become obsessed with discovering your darkest secret. Perhaps they had projected their own fears onto you. Perhaps they were looking for evidence that you were not as sincere as they hoped. Perhaps they wanted a reason to feel less guilty about their own situation. Perhaps they thought if you had a secret too, everything would somehow feel equal. But secrets do not create equality. They create distance. They create confusion. They create stories that grow larger than reality. And when the truth finally arrives, it can feel shocking. Simply because the imagination had been working overtime. That is why the psychic's first statement matters. You are asking the wrong question. The right question was never, "What is wrong with you?" It was, "What truth am I avoiding?" That question changes everything. It changes the person. It changes the relationship. It changes the way they see the past. And it changes the meaning of every silence. There may be another twist, though. The psychic had noticed something else. She told them that their fixation on your darkest secret was connected to a fear that you were emotionally stronger than they were. They had mistaken your silence for weakness. They had mistaken your distance for indifference. They had mistaken your ability to continue living your life as evidence that you did not care. But perhaps the opposite was true. Perhaps you simply understood that not every question deserves an immediate answer. Perhaps you understood that chasing someone for clarity can sometimes create more confusion. Perhaps you were learning to let actions speak louder than words. That possibility unsettled them, because if you had already begun moving forward emotionally, their confession might not produce the reaction they imagined. They might have expected tears. They might have expected anger. They might have expected you to demand answers. But you could simply say, "Thank you for telling me. I need time." And somehow, that would be more powerful than any dramatic reaction. Because it would place the decision back where it belongs, with you. The person would have to sit with the uncertainty. They would have to understand that telling the truth does not guarantee a particular outcome, and perhaps that is the lesson they needed most. The story was never about uncovering a secret. It was about learning that people cannot build genuine connections while hiding the foundations. The marriage becomes the symbol of that hidden foundation. The psychic becomes the mirror. The secret becomes the question, and your response becomes your freedom. There is another layer to the story. The psychic tells them that they should stop searching for supernatural confirmation and start paying attention to ordinary reality. Look at actions, look at choices, look at honesty, look at consistency, look at whether someone respects boundaries, look at whether their words match what they actually do. That is where truth becomes visible, not through dramatic predictions, not through mysterious signs, not through promises that someone is destined to behave a certain way, but through real choices, and the person realizes that if they truly care about you, they must respect your ability to make your own choice. They cannot turn the situation into a romantic fantasy where every obstacle proves the connection is stronger. Real life is more complicated. Marriage matters, commitments matter, honesty matters. Boundaries matter, and your well-being matters too. That is why the confession must be bigger than emotion. It must include accountability. It must include clarity. It must include the willingness to accept whatever follows. The person looks at the message again. Your name remains on the screen. They wonder whether they should add another paragraph. They decide not to. They have said enough for now. The truth is finally out. And for the first time in a long time, they breathe differently. Not because everything is fixed, it is not. Not because they know what will happen next, they do not, but because they are no longer carrying the responsibility of maintaining a secret. That does not erase what happened, it does not guarantee forgiveness, it does not magically resolve a marriage, but it creates the possibility of an honest next step. And that is where the story reaches its most important moment. You read the message. You read it once. Then again. You feel the weight of it. There are questions. There may be.